All right, so we're back for another lecture in the theory of evolution by natural selection. All right, so we're on to evidence of evolution. So, is there scientific evidence that evolution actually occurs, or is it just some random guess? Is there evidence out there that evolution does occur? And there are. So, we're going to learn about six different ones. There's what, five of them here: analogous structures, homologous structures. Over here, it doesn't say it, but this would be what considered a vestigial structure, looking at the fossils of long dead animals, and usually they're extinct now, and also comparing the embryos of organisms that are closely related. All right, so this is where we're going to get into evidence of evolution. All right, so I'm going to try to keep this under 15 minutes because it's not very long. But anyways, all right, so the first piece of evidence we're going to look at is called fossils. Hopefully you know what fossils are, but if you don't, fossils are the preserved remains of ancient organisms found in rock layers. And remember, if you remember the law of superposition, the deeper the fossils are found in the earth, the older they are. So if you look at fossils that are deep and then you come up shallower and shallower, you can see how species changed over time as older fossils and they become newer and newer and newer. You can see how the species have changed over time. So, for example, millions of years ago, land mammals started spending more time in the water to find food. So, over time, their bodies evolved to become more adapted to life in the water. So, because of fossils, the ancient bones that are preserved, because of fossils, we know now that whales used to be a terrestrial animal. They lived on land. They had legs. It's only because of fossils that we knew that whales started out as a land animal with legs. But over time, by looking at its fossils, as you go higher and higher up, they get newer and newer. You can see how the fossils changed over time and eventually evolved into modern day whales right here. So fossils, by looking at them, you can see, specifically how a species has changed over time by looking at the different layers of fossils and the different layers of the earth. All right, so the next piece of evidence for evolution that it actually does occur are called homologous structures. Going to be three different types of structures. Very easy to get them confused. What's the way to not get them confused? Well, just practicing them. Use these terms, and the more you use them, the easier it'll be to remember them. All right, so homologous structures are body parts in closely related species that have similar structure but have evolved to have different functions. For example, we have four mammals over here: humans, cats, whales, bats. We're all mammals. We're all closely related. So we're going to you look at the bone structure of the arm of a human, the front limb of a cat, the front pectoral fin of a whale, and the wing of a bat. You can see they all have the same bones. You can see they have a humerus right here. They have a radius and ulna. Both of them have a radius and ulna. They both have carpals, the wrist bones. Both have metacarpals, the bones in your hand, and they all have phalanges, which are your finger bones. Same thing with the whale over here. He has a humerus, radius, ulna, carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. Same with the bat. Why do humans, cats, whales, and bats all have the same bones in their front appendages? That is evidence that we once shared a common ancestor. But so, for example, us and whales. So maybe our whale ancestor lived closer to the ocean, so it started spending more time in the water. So it started to evolve to have characteristics that were beneficial to living in the water. But our ancestors did not live close to the water, so they didn't evolve those characteristics. So after millions and millions of years, the human arm became adapted. It evolved to grab things. Where the whale, his front appendage, since he lives in the water, he doesn't need to grab things. It evolved an adaptation. It turned into its front pectoral fins, which helps him move through the water. All right, so these are homologous structures. They have the same bones, so that's evidence that we're closely related, but they've evolved different functions because they live in different environments. All right, so this is also something, evidence of what's called divergent evolution. The word diverge means to go apart. So this means that we shared a common ancestor, but since we lived in different environments, we evolved differently and it eventually evolved into different species. In this case, four different species. All right, so homologous structures, similar structures, but they've evolved to have different functions. All right, the next one, not homologous structures, but analogous structures. Extremely easy to get these two confused. unless you work on it, unless you practice them, then eventually you'll get the hang of it. All right, so analogous structures are body parts of animals that are not closely related, but evolve similar traits because they live in similar environments. Example number one, you can see right here shark and dolphins. They look fairly similar. A dolphin looks much more similar to a shark than a dolphin looks like us. They both have pectoral fins, they both have a dorsal fin, they both have a caudal tail back here, flippers. So they're both adapted to living in the ocean. But dolphins are much more closely related to us than they are sharks. So why do they look like more like sharks? Because they both live in the ocean. So they have evolved similar traits because they live in similar environments. So that would be an analogous structure because they're not closely related, but they look similar. They develop similar traits because they both live in the ocean. Example two would be the wing of a butterfly, which is an insect, and the wing of a bat, which is a mammal. So bats are mammals just like us. But butterflies and bats, even though they're not closely related, they evolved the same trait of having wings and being able to fly. And then last thing, analogous structures are evidence of what's called convergent evolution. So remember, homologous structure was evidence of divergent evolution, closely related species evolving to become much more different. Where convergent evolution is where species that are not closely related evolve to become more and more similar. So that's the case of like the shark and the dolphin. Remember, the dolphin started on land just like us. It was a land mammal until it started spending more time in the ocean. And then after a while, it evolved to become more and more like a shark. So that would be convergent evolution because sharks and dolphins are not closely related, but they evolve certain traits. They become looking more and more alike because they both live in the ocean. All right, so that's analogous structures. All right, and the third type of structure, so we had homologous. That's like the arm of a human and the wing of a bat. They have the same bones, but they're different functions. Arm of a human is for grabbing things, wing of a bat is for flying. But why do they have the same bones? That's evidence that we're closely related. We share a common ancestor, but through divergent evolution, we became more and more different from each other. Then we had analogous structures like the body of a shark and the body of a dolphin. They're not even closely related. Sharks are fish. They have never left the ocean. They've been in the ocean their entire existence. Dolphins started in the ocean, and as a mammal, they developed on land as a land mammal, and then they went back into the ocean. So they're not even closely related, but they look alike because of convergent evolution. They both live in the ocean, so they adapt similar traits, which makes them look more and more similar. All right, the third one is what's called vestigial structures. These are body parts of animals that are still present today, but they no longer serve any purpose. So there's a couple of them. So one of them is the human appendix. You can see right there. It's the first part of the large intestine right here. The first part's called the cecum. And this little thing that sticks out like this little finger, that's the appendix. You can have it cut off and it doesn't harm you one bit because we do not need the appendix. So, why do we have one? If we don't need it, why do we have it? Well, it's evidence that it once much larger and it was used for us to digest things like leaves and grass, which is cellulose or fiber. We no longer can digest leaves, and you can eat a leaf if you want, but you can't get any nutrition from it because we cannot digest cellulose. But the appendix used to be a much larger organ that allowed us to digest things like leaves and grass. But we don't eat leaves and grass anymore. We eat mostly, meat and other types of fruits and vegetables. So the appendix is worthless. And over millions and millions of years, it's gotten smaller and smaller and smaller, but it's still there. Another one right here. If you were in charge of designing whales, why in the world would you give whales leg bones, a pelvis, which is your hip bone, and also the femur, which is your upper leg bone? Why would you design a whale with leg bones? Because he doesn't have legs. It makes no sense. But that's evidence that whales once did have legs. They're mammals just like us. So, yes, the species started on land as a land mammal, and then it started to go into the ocean more and more to find food. And eventually, through evolution, it has evolved into modern whales. But the vestigial structure of a pelvis and the leg bones are still there, evidence that whales once had legs, but they evolved to lose them. All right, so we're on to the fifth piece of evidence that evolution actually does occur. So we started with fossils, the ancient remains of dead plants and animals, it could be from thousands, even millions, hundreds of millions of years ago. Homologous structures, remember that's like the arm of a human and the wing of the bat. They have the same bones because we shared a common ancestor, but we've evolved to have them have different functions. The wing of a bat is for flying, and the arm of a human is for grabbing things. We had analogous structures. That's like the body of a dolphin and the body of a shark. Sharks and dolphins aren't even closely related, but through convergent evolution, they've evolved similar traits, similar characteristics, because they both live in the ocean. And then we had vestigial structures. Those are structures that are still present in an organism's body, but no longer have a function. They don't have a job anymore. They're useless. Well, the question is, why do we have them if they're useless? Well, that's evidence that they once were useful, but we've evolved to no longer need them. All right, so the fifth one is embryology. Embryology, and that's a study of how embryos develop before birth. So these are unborn babies. So you can see right here, we have a human embryo, we got a pig, a tortoise, which is kind of like a turtle, and a lizard. Look at the embryos. They all have a tail. All four of them have a tail, even the human. They all also have gill slits like fish, and they all look alike. So, I mean, if a doctor showed you one of these embryos and said, congratulations, you're having a baby, which one's human? I wouldn't know. Maybe when you get to this stage, yeah, okay, that's a human and that's a pig. But early in their development, the embryos look very, very similar. The question is why? Why would embryos look similar unless we are close or related to these other species of animals? So embryology is another piece of evidence that evolution actually does occur and that all life on Earth is actually related to each other. All right, we've reached the sixth and final piece of evidence that evolution actually does occur. We're under 12 minutes so far, so I've really done a good job. Remember, 12 minutes lecture in college, that's nothing. That's just him getting warmed up. So it's a college prep class, so I'm trying to prep you for college. So you should be listening to this and actually taking notes. Anyways, all right, so the sixth and final piece of evidence is DNA sequencing. So scientists compare the DNA of different species to see how closely related they are. The more similarities in the DNA means they share a more recent common ancestor, and it shows that they are related. All right, so you can see here, us and dogs share 90% of the same genes in our DNA. Us and dogs, 90%. Why? If we're not related somehow to dogs, why do we share so much DNA? Same thing with cats. 90%. Same with dogs. So we share 90% of the same DNA with both dogs and cats. Then they looked at elephants. They sequenced its entire genome, looked at every gene and all of its DNA, and showed that 70% is the same, elephants and humans. And the last one is Mr. Chimpanzee over here. They sequenced its DNA in 2005 and noticed that over 98% of the DNA in humans and chimpanzees are identical. That is evidence that us and chimpanzees are closely related. We shared a common ancestor, but we evolved into modern humans, and then that ancestor went this way, divergent evolution, into modern chimpanzees. All right, so the more DNA or genes that two species share, the more closely related they are. And if every life on Earth, if we're all related, that is not evidence, but that's proof that evolution does occur. All right, hopefully you took some notes because here comes the quiz time. Hope you enjoy it, and I'll talk to you next time.